that a lot for? I'm an alcoholic. My name's Gail. How you doing? I ain't doing so good. I'm glad to be here, though. If there's some place I'm not going to be doing good, I'm glad it's here with you guys. I really actually am kind of lucky. I'm the kind of drunk that I put everything off for as long as I can. I don't get nervous about speaking until about the last 5 minutes just before. So I guess I'm kind of lucky. I just go crazy about 5 minutes before I have to stand up. And before that, I just kind of lay back and give it all to God. And then it's, I got to stand up and go, Lord, take it all back. But I'm delighted. I just want to thank the committee for inviting me to come here. It's one of the neatest things that's happened to me, to be someplace in Rhode Island and have somebody call me from San Diego and say, come on out here and speak. And the way it happened was kind of interesting. It was real circuitous, Somebody called Central Service in Rhode Island and said, do you know a Gail D? And how they had heard about me. I spoke at ICIPAR in '82 in New York City, and I guess the committees or somebody got together and then brought my name up to Lee. So she called Rhode Island Central Service, which is about an hour away from where I lived, and I just gave a brief description to me, and the girl said, I know somebody by that description. I don't have her number, but I have, a number of someone in Newport. So she called this old guy named Cotty that lives in Newport, who said, yeah, I know Gail, but I don't have her number. I got I got a number for, somebody I know who knows her, and or an old number for her. I'll try this old number that I have for her, which was my family's home's number. They called my mom, and Cotty said to my mom, they want to speak to Gail out in San Diego. So my mom called me and said, somebody wants to talk to you out in San Diego about going. I mean, it was just so roundabout, and 4 days had passed before I even had gotten the message. And it was just kind of crazy. When I finally got to talk to Lee, I was all excited, and it seemed so far away. It was like Christmas time when I talked to her. And I was like, oh, that's too far away for me to even think about, but we'll see, we'll see how it goes, and here we are. I think I'm glad about it. Really, I'm delighted to be here. Has not always been that way. Somebody asked me yesterday, how we sit around and we're meeting each other, and how long you been in the program? And I haven't had a drink since August 1st of 1974. And they looked at me and they said, boy, you're really lucky that you came in early. And I said, I didn't think so then. Standing here now, having some experience in AA, I feel great about it, But I tell you, the kind of drunk that I was, I came here, you guys got the whole bag of sickness. I put down the drink and the drug, and I walked in here, and I was a sick puppy, And I was not real excited about being here. I didn't understand the AA lingo. I didn't even know that I had the disease of alcoholism. I had to sit in meetings and hear about this thing, and how I came to know I had it was by the process of identifying. At my first meeting, I heard someone talk about, the soul sickness, the fear and the anger, the resentment, the self-pity, the hate, the lashing out. And I was like, that's what I said, oh my God, this is stuff that I thought that I would just quietly die with and go to the grave with, and people are sitting around this table and they're talking out loud about it, Now, that's the kind of drunk that I was. I'll tell you how I was. I come from a family where my father was a drunk. And what happened was, as a young kid, I was always told that what happened in that house stayed in that house. And so I learned to stuff a whole lot, and when I sat on a lot of negative feelings. I mean, the feelings that you have when you're growing up with an alcoholic in the home. And for me, I was the oldest of 5 kids. That had a lot to do with, fear. My father drank. He went from early on in his disease. It was very pleasant and a lot of fun, a lot of driving and crazy rides to the beach and that kind of thing. But as his drinking progressed, my mom got beat up a lot. And I heard that and was very aware of that, being the oldest of the 5. And I always had a real keen sense of, I was really tuned in, to them emotionally. Okay, I was a very watchful kind of kid, and I could gauge by my mom's reaction what was going to go down in that house. You know, I could gauge by whether or not my father had his shades on. Those things that I looked for that indicated to me what was going to happen. And as my dad's alcoholism progressed, you know, I sat on the fear, you know, and the anger, and the torn feelings of hearing, you know, the people that I loved the most fighting and arguing. You know, but I was torn between the love that I had for my father, who was a great man, who, I guess like most drunks, is basically a good person, just sick, you know. I was torn with love for him, and then the confusion and the anger and the hate of hearing my mom get hurt, you know. And I sat on those kind of feelings. So that came a part of my disease, like right away. I believe that either I was conditioned into alcoholism before I drank, or I was born with it. That's not a belief of AA's, but that's my own personal belief. I believe that by the time I picked up my first drink, I was a dry culture just waiting to bloom. All you had to do was just pour the booze on, and I was full blown. I never had a time in my drinking where I didn't cross any invisible line. You know, you hear people say stuff like that. That didn't happen to me. I was there already, you know. That's kind of how it was for me. And I think that if I wasn't born that way, the conditioning of just living in that atmosphere just kind of culminated me to be a dry drunk before I drank. I come from a history, and it's amazing to me that I stand here because there's a history on my father's side of the family of alcoholism, and on my mother's side of heavy, heavy drug addiction. And I'll tell you, there are people in my family who at very young ages have suffered because of, you know, addiction, you know, to booze and or drugs. For me, it's the same thing. You know, I can't drink, I can't smoke, I can't snort, I can't chew, I can't drop anything, I can't do nothing, you know. I have to be clean and dry, and it's all the same to me. It's all the same to me, you know. You can, whatever form it is, if it's mood altering, it causes a problem for me. So to tell you a little bit what happened in my family was, you know, at the age of 15, you know, a cousin of mine, robbing a drugstore, got the back of his head blown off, okay? Another cousin of mine at the age of 18 was in a rough part of town, got in a fight, and somebody blew him away by shooting him in the stomach. Other cousins that I was very close to on my mother's side of the family that had a heavy drug dependency are in jail now doing time for murder because of their addiction. One of my cousins walked out in a drugstore with a sawed-off shotgun and killed somebody trying to take care of his habit, you know. There have been members of my family who were found stabbed to death, you know. My cousin Chubby was found stabbed to death in the chest 17 times, and her husband, you know, was tried for that murder. And that's the kind of stuff that I saw. You know, that's what I saw about addiction. I saw things like physical abuse. I saw the people that I played with on the beach, people that I slept with and sat around the table with and ate, slowly get ticked off because of their addiction. You know, our family has suffered with the disease of drug addiction, alcoholism. And, you know, seeing that, you'd think that it would kick off in me some kind of a warning, some kind of a thing that would say, watch out, you know, you're going down quick, you know, and you know, the numbers are getting shorter because of this thing, just watch out. And you know, it never occurred to me not to drink. It never occurred to me not to pick up a drug. Never occurred to me, you know. I never said, I'm not going to be like my father. I never said, I'm not going to do drugs because I don't want to end up in jail or I don't want to murder anybody. Never occurred to me, you know. I was in that kind of mindset. What happened to me was because there was alcoholism on my father's side of the family, and we're a very close-knit group, I was able to drink at a really young age because his sisters, my aunt, had booze around fluently, and I spent a lot of time away from home in my aunt's house. And I've always been what I term as a traveling drunk. And I don't know if it was to get away from the pressures of what was going on in my home, but anytime I got a chance, I was over somebody else's house in the family, be it my grandmother, one of my aunts. I was gone. And I remember being gone so much that, my mom would say to me, Gail, you've been over, Aunt Thelma's house for the whole summer. Don't you want to come home? No. And part of that was for two reasons. One, because I didn't want to hear the stress and the strain of what was going on there. And the other part was Aunt Thelma liked to drink a whole lot, and she was a fall-down, pass-out drunk, and the booze was left free, And we could drink it, And it was, and that's how I got to drink at a very, very young age. Before I hit double digits in age, I was drinking like that on a regular basis. And I was just, what I thought, having a good time, and it seemed natural. It just seemed natural. It did not seem natural for me to do in my parents' house because my mother does not have a drinking or a drug problem. She just got sick from living with other drunks, but she's just a good person, and that just wouldn't fly with her, So I knew where to go, and to drink and to get kind of wild, and that's what I did. And I just kind of went on like that. I stayed with my cousins, and we got drunk and kind of crazy, and we did a lot of things like, putting their mother to bed, getting rid of other people, stashing away the money so that people wouldn't rip her off so that, they could get fed. That kind of thing was going on. So it wasn't always really pretty. And there was times when it was okay. When I felt the safest and most secure when I was at my grandmother's house. My father's mother taught me some very basic things that luckily I was able to let her know about when I was sober and before she passed away. Things like, learning how to pray. My first belief in God I got from my grandmother. She just taught me some really good basic things, how to love baking and taking care of my body and my clothes, and just really solid. I learned from my grandmother because I couldn't stay home long enough because there was so much going on there to learn it from my mom. So what happened as things progressed, and I had trouble with drinking by the time I was in junior high school, and it was kind of fuzzy because you couldn't really tell whether it was about just a regular teenager, just getting kind of wild and what we go through, the zits and getting crazy and emotions happening and all that kind of stuff, or whether it was about alcoholism. And I only know from hindsight what was happening with me, and it was about alcoholism. What started to happen with me was my folks split up when I was about 9 or 10 years old, and I think what happened with that was my father's violence went beyond just my mom. He started hitting us, and when the first time he did that, she left. That's finally what it took. And when the family split up, it was just like chaos to me. I was all kinds of terrified. We were living with our grandparents, and my mom went to work, and she had always been in that household. When I came home every day, my mom was there, and I remember the shock the first time I came home, and she had started working. It was just like, it blew me away. She wasn't there, and it was just like the foundation, any little bit of foundation that I had at that time was just like swept out from under me. We were living with my grandparents. That was totally new. My mom was working. She had always been in the house. My father was gone, and drunk or sober, he had been there in my life on a regular basis for 9 years, and I was scared. I was like, what the hell is going to happen? My father's gone, my mother's working, I'm staying with people that I'm not really used to. And I was terrified, and I was angry, and I felt sorry, for the family. I was like, gee, everybody knows, that, our family split up because of my dad's drinking, and I felt sorry for myself. And I'll tell you, I sat on top of all those emotions. I didn't tell a soul, I just stuffed it down. And I think I made a decision then to be quiet about that because everything seemed so disruptive, and so I felt so insecure, and everything seemed so crazy. I felt like if I complained, that I might get lost in the shuffle too. It's like, I just didn't want to make any noise. You know, I didn't want anybody to feel like she's making too much noise, get rid of her. So I just sat on that stuff. And when my mom finally got on her feet and we got our own place and everything, I had a lot of responsibility. Being the oldest of 5, I had to go to school, come home, and my mom was working and going to school, and I had to like clean and cook and put my brothers and sisters to bed and do all that kind of thing. And that was fine for a while. It was fine until junior high when I started noticing my girlfriends had nicer clothes, you know, because they could afford nicer clothes. They were going to dances. They had little boyfriends and all this kind of thing. And all I was doing was babysitting, you know. It seemed like that's all I was doing, you know. I had all this friggin' responsibility, and everybody was going out having a good time, and I didn't say a word about it. I sat on that too, you know. I sat on the fact that I felt bad that I didn't have real nice clothes. I sat on top of the anger I felt because I couldn't go to the dances. I sat on top of the anger that I had all the adult responsibility I felt like I had. I just felt so sorry for myself that I have to, you know, I got these brothers and sisters and I have to take care of them, and poor Gail a drink, you know. That's kind of how it was. And I also had this false kind of pride about this false kind of strength about I didn't need to talk about it. You know, I've been trained that way too, you know. Not only do you keep it, what happens in the house, but I just had this kind of, I said, well, I must be very strong and very smart because I'm even keeping this all to myself. And I mean, what happened was I was just getting emotionally sick and isolated. And that's how I felt in high school. I always felt like I was operating behind 3 feet of glass. You know, like I wasn't quite touching when other people were touching. I wasn't really quite there. And I can't explain that feeling any better than that, except for that I always felt like I was a watcher and I wasn't participating fully. You know, it's always like I was the third eye looking down on everything and judging and making notes kind of thing. Kind of removed, just feeling kind of removed. And what happened was, as my drinking progressed, I lost that kind of control, like the control of not, you know, saying how angry I was and not letting the self-pity out. As my drinking progressed, it was like, I always think of it like a pressure cooker, you know, like how you let off the steam a little bit and it's like, and it closed. Well, that's what started to happen to me. I'd drink and this little hiss of anger would come out, like, or some hate would come out, you know. I started to leak these bad feelings. And how they manifested themselves was like, the people in my family took a great deal of pride in the fact that with all these things that had happened, that I appeared to be very bright and I was in accelerated classes and that kind of thing. And how I let my anger out was that I started not performing that well. I was like, well, you know, well, the hell with them, you know. Who cares whether or not I get an A, you know? And the attitude started to slip. It was just like I couldn't just come out and say, well, I'm angry because, you know, we're split up, or I feel sorry for myself because I think the whole thing, you know, all I did was I acted out, you know, in other areas. And the grades started to slide. And when my mom, where she had depended on me to do things on a very regular basis that I'd always done, I started letting them slip. You know, like, I wouldn't cook the dinner. You stay home and you cook it, you know. And I wouldn't care what time the kids went to bed. And sometimes I would leave and I'd go someplace else and let them fend for themselves. That kind of thing started happening. And then I stopped going to school on a regular basis. And of course, you know, trouble started. Then when, you know, the more I acted out, the more trouble started to happen in my life. What happened was by the time I was, I think I had my first joint when I was like 11 or 12, and my first drug shortly thereafter. Because I always looked older than I was, and because I acted older, because I had this responsibility, I was able to get a job sooner than I legally should have. And I was working at this steakhouse place and bussing tables and that kind of thing. And this kid came up to me while I was in the kitchen and opened up my hand. He put a white tablet in it. He said, "Gail, you ever hear of LSD?" And I had heard about it. And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Well, if you take this in about half an hour. He said, you're going to get off just fine. He said, you'll hallucinate, you'll see some color, da, 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 da. And I mean, I had never done anything like this before in my life. I looked at that, I popped it right in my mouth and said, okay, and about half an hour, Never said, well, should I take, never questioned it. Never said, should I take, it was never an issue. Just like the drinking was never an issue. I did it just the way I'm breathing in and out right now. It was real natural, I never questioned it. It was just like, popped it right in and was waiting, That's me, and that's how my disease was, I never thought twice about it, And I was off and running with hallucinogenics and then speed and all that kind of thing for another 2 or 3 years. And I tell you, what happened with that was instead of the pressure cooking going, it went, and all hell started to break loose. Now, it's a thing that was getting I started feeling unmanageable, okay? I think the people around me, they tell me, after I got sober, the people who were close to me said it seemed to them that I changed overnight, But see, I'd been living with this crap all along, so it was no surprise to me. I just thought I had sat on it so well that it shocked the hell out of them. And I was like, it was no news to me that I was a mess, What happened with the mixture of the booze and the drugs was that, I couldn't hold back. My life got so unmanageable. The thing was progressing so fast that it scared me. I had the illusions of some kind of control because, at some phase after junior high, I turned into a hippie, and I was into shocking people then. And what I did was, every nice dress that we could afford to get for myself, I chopped up into patches and put on my jeans. I stopped wearing underclothes. I hung out on the corner and with a pipe. It's very obvious what I was doing. On the corner with the pipe, smoking. And I got in with a real crazy crowd of people who drank and drugged just like I did. Needless to say, by this time, the grades were like, people were like stunned. They were stunned at me. And when I found that to give myself the illusion of having some kind of control, I acted as if I wanted things to happen the way they were. The last thing I was going to admit in the midst of all this craziness was that I was out of control. So when the first time I just didn't come home for a while, it never occurred to me the first time that happened that somebody might be worried about me. I just left home. And that's how far things had gotten. And the things in here had gotten so crazy and so twisted that it just seemed logical. The disease was so thick and set back here that the action that I was doing didn't seem crazy to me. When I walked back in the door 2 or 3 days later and people were all upset, I was like, well, what the hell? It made sense to me, And then when I saw how terrified, the people that cared for me, when I saw that, my mom was terrified and that, my grandparents were terrified, I got really scared because it was like, it was slowly starting to thinking back here that maybe I was a little over my head, but I kind of still had the illusion of, well, if I really reach out and I want to be good, my mom will always pull me out of this crap. Well, my grandfather, who I loved dearly and who loved me dearly, I said, Pop will pull me out of this crap. But then I started to see that they were scared also, and I was like, whoa. I was looking at their faces, and what I was seeing at the time, I didn't know what then was their powerlessness, They were looking at me baffled, like, what happened? Where were you? Why are you doing this? And, of course, I'm not going to say, well, because I'm out of control, because I'm a drug addict. I didn't know. So, I'd say things like, well, pretending that I had control. If I didn't come from a broken home, I wouldn't be like this, trying to make somebody feel guilty, somebody else feel responsible for it. And if you didn't do this, I didn't have all the responsibility, I wouldn't feel the need to run away. And if you didn't, I had the finger out there all the time. But fortunately, I thought unfortunately at the time, my mom just didn't buy that kind of stuff. And she would just say to me, No. What's happening to you, Gail, and what you're feeling is because of what you are doing. She said, we're not making you leave. You're free to sit here at the table and eat with us. But I had become so withdrawn at that time because of my drinking and drug, and I would take my plate and I'd go and I'd eat in my room. And when it just got worse, I was like digging a little hole for myself, and I couldn't see it all the time that clearly, that, my behavior was subnormal, and that very obviously to other people I had a real problem. I was rationalizing a lot, when I said to people, I wouldn't be this screwed up if I didn't come from a broken home, or if I didn't have all this responsibility, or if you didn't have to work all the time. I was trying to talk myself into believing that, I wanted to believe it was just those things, but back here somewhere, it wasn't ringing true, and I was starting to get a little panicky, And the thing was, I'd get fearful and I'd get panicky, but I didn't know about what. I didn't know that it was about the drinking and the drugs that were getting me like this, So what I started to think was, leave. It wasn't good enough anymore to just take the plate off the table and go in my room, or to disappear for a day or two with a bunch of friends, crashing someplace. I started to feel like leave the state, get away. And that's what I started to do. What happened for me was, as I started to get aware, and this panic started to grow, this feeling of impending doom, I had it the most when I was around my immediate family. And what it felt like was I'd come home, and they're good people, My mom and my brothers and sisters are real good people, and they'd be there, and they'd be okay. Like they'd be watching TV together, or they'd be having a meal or something. And I was such a wreck inside because of the progression of this disease that I could not stand the chaos I felt inside to see them so calm. It was like, the inconsistency was too great for me to handle. It's like it just pointed out to me that something was wrong with me. I said, how can I be from the same bunch of people? How can they sit there and eat together and seem to find some kind of happiness or some kind of peace in being together? And I'm such a mess. I couldn't stand to see it. So what I would do is I'd come home and I'd get everybody all upset, all ruffled up and excited, and I'd make all kind of waves, and I'd look at the damage and I'd say, no, the outside matches my inside, and I'd leave, And that's what they hated to see me coming, because that's what I would do. I'd be like, I couldn't stand the fact that I didn't have their resources, it seemed to me. What made them want to be together? I'd lost touch with that. What made them laugh together? I had no idea what that was about anymore. And it scared me, So I was like, if I can't do it, I'll be damned if I'm going to let them do it. And I'd close the ways and off I'd go. And what started to happen was I started hitchhiking cross country. I'd pack a backpack and I'd go by myself. And the first time I did that, I think I just stayed on the road for about 9 months. And what I was trying to do was just stay straight. What happened to me when I hitchhiked was that when I was in the actual physical process of going from one place to another, I did not drink or drug, But what happened was when I stopped, the whole thing would start over again, okay? What started to happen, of course, when all you have is a backpack and yourself, I had to steal a lot, I had to lie a lot. I did a bunch of stuff to support my habit. And every time I stopped at a location, and I was really good at getting people to want to take me in, no matter where I was, it seemed like the same thing started to happen. That happened to me at home. The stealing would start. I would start to lie. People would ask me to leave because I would cause the same wave making that I caused at home. I started causing with other people. And they just didn't want me around. I was scaring them. I'd come in the house with stolen goods, or I'd disappear for a week and then show up again. That kind of stuff. And people were like, we can't have this. I'm invading people's homes, their right to their privacy and their peace of mind. Sometimes I robbed their money. It was bad. And I'd go to the next place, and I'd stay straight, and then I'd stop, and the same thing would start to happen again. And I got out to this coast that way 3 or 4 times, and I stayed up in Hermosa Beach around the LA area for a while, and when I was there, it got real crazy. It got real crazy. I mean, it was right there that I knew that something was wrong. I had gotten so focused on just taking care of drinking and drugging that I really did not see. I put blinders on is what I did. I couldn't stand to see what I saw, the reflection of myself in other people's eyes. I could not stand to see what I saw there, you know. And I think that's what I was running away from. And sometimes I saw disgust, sometimes I saw pity, sometimes I saw that people wanted to help me, and that really terrified me or pissed me off, or I thought it was condescending, you know. And I would do my shock routine and start swearing and get real loud and hostile, and, you know, and people would back off, you know, and that's what I wanted. And my world got very, very small. It got to be just about doing what I had to do to maintain staying high. And so, you know, there were people around me who, you know, well, we stole cars, we carried guns, you know, we robbed stores. You know, the things that my cousins had gotten blown away for when I was younger, I was now doing, okay? I remember staying in a place, and downstairs they were pimping teenage girls, you know? And I remember the first time I got conscious, and I was staying in this place for about a month before I got conscious of what was going on. And I remember saying something about it like, hey, is this what's happening? And people looking at me like, you mean to tell me, you know, don't bullshit. You've been here for a month, and you're just tuning in. You didn't know that? I mean, they thought I was just, you know, pulling their leg. But I sincerely did not know that for about a month. And it was happening right around me. But that's how out of it I was. I just, I was not conscious. You know, the only thing that I was about was getting high. You know, that's all I wanted to do. And so that I didn't feel strange or any weirder than I had to, I tried to find people who were into doing the same thing that I was doing, you know. And that's where it was at, you know. That's just where it was at. And I tell you, and I don't know if words ever say it enough, but I know you guys know what I'm talking about when I said that I was the most saddest, sickest thing. I mean, the sick, hollow feeling that I had in my chest most of the time, I mean, it was killing me, you know. Anytime I thought I'd get a little clear-headed at all and got in touch with what I used to call the gap, you know, it just seemed like there was this gap in my chest, I'd run right out and I'd go get something else, you know. And what happened to me while I was out here and all that crazy stuff was going on, and I got in some real sick situations, and I said, my God, you know, I could stay out here. I'd been out of touch with my family, and nobody knew where I was. I said, you know, you could stay out here, and you keep doing this kind of thing. I said, you can die, and nobody would even know for a while that knows you or means anything to you, you know. And I got really scared about that, and I wanted to go home. And I said, well, how can I go back there? How can... I knew my family. I had hurt them so much, and I had said and done so many things to alienate them that I knew they didn't want to see me. You know, not the way I was, not with jeans cut off so that my cheeks were hanging out, and no bra, and smoking a pipe, and I mean, you know, they just didn't need that. So I decided that I had to go back home, and what I would do to be acceptable is that I would clean up my act. I would stop doing the drugs, you know, and I would just drink, and I would stop the hippie outfit look and that kind of thing, and just get cleaned up, you know. And I had gone home a couple of times with that same idea, but never could pull it off. And this time I got so scared and I was so desperate, because I felt like I was losing it, you know. Whatever grip I had, I was losing it. And I went home and I said, I'm going to pull this off, you know. And I got rid of the hippie clothes, and I didn't do the drugs. I found a girl who was going to nursing school, and we got a nice apartment in the area of the hospital, and I got a job in the hospital. And I got all the things that I thought would make me look acceptable, again, to my family and to people who had known me. Because I was born and raised in Newport, Rhode Island, and I had burnt a whole bunch of bridges, and I was just trying to recreate the things, thinking that would make this gap go away, and it would get me back in the good graces of people, And I got all that straightened out, and the drugs gone, the hippie clothes gone. I got some nice clothes and a nice apartment, a nice roommate, and halfway decent job, and I had putting some money in the bank, and just plodding away at it, and whole time patting myself on the back because I was not doing drugs and I was drinking every single day. And I tell you, I was sicker then than I was hitting bottom then. I was 19 years old and feeling about 90 years old. Like I felt like I had mileage on me, and I did. I'd gone across country about 4 or 5 times. One time I did it in 3 days, and it was crazy. But I did have but I just felt old and sick and tired, and I felt defeated. I felt very weak, very weak. I felt like what was happening was a disease that kicked my spirit in. Any kind of spirit of, being a human being and feelings of like love and trust and being physically well and having any kind of normal energy to want to be physical, like romp or play or swim or any of that was kicked right out of me because of my diet. I had none of that, Everything I did, it was an effort for me to get up daily and bathe myself to the point where I didn't even bother with that anymore. I'd put on the nice clothes, but I stopped bathing. I had lost a lot of it. And what started to happen with the drinking was I started to have the horrors. And I tell you, it was the pits because I thought I was having flashbacks from the times that I did drugs until somebody explained to me that when you drink a whole lot, the same thing can happen. Because I thought booze was like water, Nothing could happen to you when you were drinking. It was just like the old standby. And people were telling me, this stuff can make you just as crazy. But I wasn't worried about that because I had these things. I had the apartment, the house, and the job. But I didn't understand why I felt as crazy or crazier, looking good, but feeling crazy, just feeling crazy. And because I started having the horrors and stuff, and I had phobias, like I was afraid of dark spaces, and I started sleeping with a knife under my pillow, and I started getting situations like I couldn't explain. Like my roommate was normal, and she liked to have company, and she liked to have her folks over once in a while, and she's going to nursing school, and she had to study a lot, and I had such fear of contact with other human beings other than what was necessary that I would hide, and it was very obvious after a while. I couldn't even fake it no more, like I'd hear somebody come up the stairs and it'd throw me into a panic, and I'd run into a closet, you can't explain that kind of stuff to people, like why are you in the closet, what do I say? I'm 6 foot tall, big. I'm scared. That doesn't fly. I was driving my roommate crazy. I'd go to bed at night, and I was drinking so much that with my eyes open, I had the horrors. If I closed them, I saw things. If they were open, I saw things. I woke up screaming, cold sweats and stuff a lot. And this girl to the nursing school. She said, I can't take it. She said, I can't take finding you locking yourself in the bathroom, you're locking yourself in closets, you don't want to talk to people anymore. She said, you haven't bathed in I don't know how long, and you stink, She said, what the hell, And what I had learned to do with people who would dare confront me was I developed a real razor-sharp tongue. And I could slice you up so fast and so bad that you would wish there was another century or something, And that's what I did. It was my defense, If the anger and the hostility didn't keep you 20 feet away, if that didn't get you out of the way and you dared to get in within that radius, then I had something else for you, And that usually worked. And that's what I did to poor Debbie. She tried to talk to me about my drinking. She said, Gail, the people you're hanging around with, she said, the only reason why they want you around is because you drink like them. And she was talking to me, and she saw me measuring my booze, and I mean, she was living with him. She saw the craziness of it, and she tried to talk to me about it. And when I got finished with her, she was like babbling, she was babbling. And I feel sick when I think about that now. But she was like, okay, you won. I'm leaving. I'm leaving. She was like, I can't talk to you. Nobody can talk to you. And there was one more person leaving. And when Debbie left, it was really the best thing that could have happened to me because it was me with me, which is like sick X-rated company. What happened was. When my father was living with us, I used to gauge, where he was at, a lot of times by looking at his eyes, and I knew if he had his shades on, I knew how to act, and if he had them off. There was just certain things that I used to gauge by, and there was, and I never doubted that my father loved me, He loved all of us a whole lot, but I never doubted that he loved me, but there was a time when I used to look at him when he had been drinking. Had this look in his eyes, and I knew then, no matter how much that man loved me, if I approached him at that time or did anything to harass him or that he thought was harassment, that he would hurt me. There was just this look that he'd get every now and then, and it would just make me scream inside and panic because I just knew that Daddy wasn't in there. There was some animal there, and I always remembered that look. I mean, when you're a kid and one of your parents has that, you don't forget it. I can see it right now, just like it was yesterday. And what happened to me was, at the end of my drinking, when Debbie left, was I looked in the mirror and I was looking at myself and I saw my father's eyes. And I was stunned. I was looking and I was standing there for a long time before I realized what it was that was hypnotizing me. And I was looking at myself and I said, what is it? What is it? What's the same in this picture? What is this reminding me of? And I said, holy Christ! I said, there's Daddy's eyes. I have Daddy's eyes. And I just was like, it just blew me away. It just really indicated that something was very sick and very wrong, and that it was more than the fact that the apartment wasn't working, and the money in the bank wasn't working, and the job at the hospital wasn't working. People there weren't talking to me because I had begun to lie and be such a cutthroat. I realized that there was something very sick and sad about me. And when I realized that, of course, the only thing I knew to do was to drink some more. It didn't occur to me that it was the very thing that I had sitting on the edge of the sink while I was looking, and it never occurred to me. Luckily for me, it was occurring to somebody else that was in the program, there was meetings in the hospital while I was working, and there was an 18-year-old girl that I saw all the time, who would always say hello to me, which was very strange because people had stopped speaking to me by that time. It was just like I guess I must have looked like the caged animal that I was, because people didn't approach me too often. And she did. She'd say hi, and how are you, and I was just like, I responded to that, It was like nobody had done that for a while, and I always responded to her whenever I was going to and from work or whenever I saw her. And one day she came right up to me and she said, you want to go out to lunch sometime? And I said, yeah, okay. She said, meet me in this room in the hospital at this time, and we'll go out to lunch. And I said, well, it's right upstairs, I'll come up on my break or something. She said, yeah, come on up. And that's how I got to my first AA meeting, I went to the room number, and I opened the door, and a big blast of smoke came out and hit me in the face. I went in, and somebody kicked out a chair for me and said, sit down. I sat down, and there's about 20, or somewhere between 20 and 25 people around the table, and that's where I heard the stuff that keeps me coming back today, and that was August 1st of 1974. And that was the last time that, the last drink I had was July 31st of 1974, and There was nothing more, wasn't any big drunk or anything eventful or anything like that. It was just sick and sad, very lonely, very pitiful place to be 20 years old, and to be feeling the way I was inside. It was just a very sad place to be. I'm broken. My spirit was broken, and that's what I walked into the meeting with. I walked into my first AA meeting feeling broken and tired, sitting on all that anger and resentment that I described to you, all that self-pity, all that anger. I just brought that needle package right into the door with me, and sat there and heard about alcoholism. I had no idea before that I was an alcoholic. And I sat there and I heard people, describing the disease, saying that it was threefold, that it was progressive, describing the kind of actions, like when I talk to people one-on-one and say some of the things that I did, so them nod, like, yep, I know. I was like, what is this? What is this thing here? Part of me, and I think part of it was the grace of God in that at that first meeting, and I heard you guys talking about all those things that we go through, the loneliness, self-pity, the anger, the fear. I heard those things being talked about. There was enough grace in my life at that time so that somewhere back here I said, the jig is up, the jig is up. I've been a lot of places, I've done a lot of things, I've heard a lot of stuff, but I never heard nothing like this, And you were speaking right to my condition, and nothing had ever touched my condition before. People went around it, they added to it. Nothing had ever spoken to my condition before. I had a defense for everything, and for what I was hearing around the table that day, I had no defense for, and I just started to cry. They were going around the table, and I remember they came to me, and I was starting to cry, and it was, fear and relief, and just knowing the jig was up, I just knew the jig was up, and this woman who was sitting next to me, and this totally amazed me, put her arm around me. I'd never seen her before in my life. She put her arm around me, and she said, I know. She said, but you never have to feel this bad again, and my condition heard that, my disease, a part of me that's sick and suffering and was aching for some kind of help, heard that, and I believed her, I believed her. And what happened to me was that because I had no friends when I came in, Debbie was gone, boyfriend was gone, I was really alone. Family didn't even buy into my skit of trying to clean it up. They didn't even buy into it this time. So I was alone. So what happened to me was, because I was so alone, that coming to AA meetings was a step-up socialist. It was like, I was coming just so I could be with some people, And what happened was, because I felt like, not only was I with people, but I felt safe with people. Now that hadn't happened since my father had started drinking. I hadn't felt safe for a very, very long time. And I felt safe at Alcoholics Anonymous meetings. And I felt safe enough to keep coming back and to hear about what this thing is about, And what I heard scared me, but what I liked even more was that I was desperate and scared enough that I was willing to do what I had to do, People said to me, get telephone numbers, get on your knees and ask for help. You got to get to 90 meetings in 90 days. Pointed out some people and said travel with them. I did that, I didn't ask a lot of questions. Another thing that I did was just to show you that you can do this program all wrong and you still don't have to drink, was that, how we say, don't make any major decisions your first year? Well, I moved to Paris, France when I was 6 weeks sober. I've been planning that trip before I came to the program because I felt the impending doom coming down, and I felt like I was really going to do some serious damage to myself, and I didn't want to do it in Rhode Island where my mother was going to have to see me be a fool one more time, And And so I said, I'm going to go to Europe, and whatever comes down, because they won't know about it, So I had stashed all this money away to go to Europe. And what happened was I just happened to get sober 6 weeks before I'd planned to go. And I still went. And when I left, of course, people were terrified for me. They were terrified. I had to go into meetings every day. In that six weeks' time, I had started making coffee. I was picking up the ashtrays. And, I started doing the action. But, I was 6 weeks sober. And I went to London first for a month, and then I went to Paris, and I stayed there until I was about 7 or 8 months sober. And when I was there, I went to AA meetings, just the way I did when I was home. And I went to at least one every day. There were only 2 or 3 American meetings, but we started another one while I was there, and went to French meetings. And during the free time, we made tapes for people, loners, who didn't have meetings. There were no groups at the time in Sicily, and we made tapes and stuff for people in Sicily. And luckily, there was a woman there who grabbed onto me, a lady named Frances, had been about 10 years sober, grabbed onto me, and helped me to try to find the right way. Now, all this mess I brought in here, I did not easily just walk down the path and just kind of start working the 12 steps. No. When I got to be about 3 months sober, I started feeling my oats, and I had a brain or something, I was living in Paris and was going to this group. I'd been there for less than a month, moved in with this guy, not supposed to be involved the first year, moved right in with him. The 2 of us together had about 3 months of sobriety. It was bad. It was real bad. And I sat on top of that, and slowly Frances eked out of me that I was staying in what I was doing, and she just shook her head and she said, "No, Gail." She said, "In AA, we ladies stand on our own 2 feet. You get out of there, And I was like, wait a minute now. I don't mind not drinking, and I don't mind coming to meetings, but you are not going to tell me how to run my life. I mean, this is separate, This is one thing here, but this is over here, and you're not going to tell me about that. That's none of your business. But she knew how to deal with me. What she did was, one night we went out for coffee, and in front of a bunch of people, she just took our inventory. She talked about me, she talked about him, she talked about us, she just, embarrassed the hell out of me, and I moved out. And she just made it miserable. So I left, and she showed me, a place where I could stay, and I figured, well, just because I moved out doesn't mean I don't have to see him. That was the thing uppermost of my mind. I'm dropping on these meetings, but the main thing was to see Martin, And but the first day that I lived in this place, and I ran down the stairs, Frances was at the bottom of the stairs with a cup of coffee and a donut, and she said, "Come on." I was like, well, "Where are we going?" She said, "Well, you're going to have to get a job if you're going to stay here." And she said, "You're going to have to learn how to speak French a little bit better than you do." And before I knew it, I was sitting in a Berlitz class, taking French. I was at the American School in Paris doing pottery. She just got me busy. And I tell you, for as sad and as sick as I was, it took a lot of effort. There were days when I would just leave her. She'd be walking with me trying to get me to sign up for something, and I would just ditch her. I'd be like, bye. I just couldn't stand the order, you know what I mean? It was just like it was just like rebellion, like this is too much, And I would leave her, but she was persistent. The next day I'd come down the stairs and she'd be there again with the coffee and the donut until I did sign up for class, and I did start to show up, and my life started getting other-centered, I started getting centered on recovery. Whenever I started bitching about stuff, she'd say to me, "What step are you on?" I was like, "Step? What does step got to do with the fact I have no money, and I'd list out all these things, and she'd say, "Gail, what's, and I'd be like, "Well, what are you talking about?" And she'd give me the 12 and 12 and say, "Look at this, and think about this," and I couldn't do it. I could not. First of all, I was such a scatterbrain, I couldn't sit down and read this stuff, it was too antsy, and what made me finally stop was the fact that one day I was on the metro, and I'm looking at, it was packed, it was like rush hour, and I'm looking at people, and I had, in my head, I heard myself saying all negative things about everybody. look at that asshole, here's this, that, and that one. And real long, look at those Arabs, I know Arabs go back to, I heard myself thinking this stuff. I said, you cannot stay sober and continue thinking the garbage that you think. I realized that I was a garbage head, you know. I said, you are a garbage head. You need help. And that's what made me look to the 12 steps. I said, well, maybe if I read something, get something other than this crap in here, maybe I'll start to feel better. And that's what I was driven to it. You know, the pain of not changing sober drove me to the 12 steps, you know. And that was good. You know, when I was about 7 or 8 months sober, and it had kind of gotten a little bit orderly, I felt like it was time for me to come home and stay sober on the ground where I did all the damage. You know, I said, I got to go home, and I've got to start cleaning up where I did the most hurt. And I came back home, and it was rough. You know, I went to meetings, and there were people there who knew me and knew what I was like. And I felt ashamed, you know. And the only thing I could do on top of all these feelings that were thawing out, you know, it was like, I do believe it was a thaw-out period because I felt worse. You know, when people say, you know, my worst day sober is better than my best day drunk, I don't know about that for me. I had some bad days, you know. And the thing that I did right, though, was that I never drank or took any substitute. I've always been very active in the program, and despite how I felt, I showed up. Even if I couldn't talk about it, even if, you know, I was sitting there wrapped in my own cocoon of whatever it was that day, I've always have come to AA. With whatever bag it was, I brought it here. And slowly, with time, some of the stuff started to unravel for me. You know, I felt committed to the group because I was making the coffee and I was washing the floor and getting everything set up. You know, they did tell me, you know, that I had to be the GSO for the group, and I got involved with service, and I kept doing this footwork, and the head was still crazy, but that wasn't the focus, you know. The focus started to be get to the meeting on time, shut up and listen. Try to remember one thing that happened at the meeting because my sponsor was going to ask me, you know. Call her, you know, call her once in a while. And let me tell you, with all the anger and this, I had this big illusion of independence because I had been on, you know, hitchhiked cross country by myself, and I'd done all these things. And I mean, the walls were just this thick, you know. And what happened was nobody tried to beat them down in the program. You know, you guys didn't beat them down. People just loved me, you know. And I know I was hard to take. And, you know, there were some people who didn't buy all the anger. They didn't try to knock down the defense. They would say, we're going to lunch, you want to come? We're going to coffee, you want to come? And I'd go and I'd be with them. And even outside of the meeting, they were talking about the program and the principles, you know. And they showed me real basic spoon-fed kind of things, you know. How to keep myself clean, how to feed myself 3 squares a day, how important that was. You know, how to sleep, you know, Gail, you got to get to sleep, you know. Got my first job back in the States. I mean, people just walked me through things, you know. And I tell you, from a kid that was drunk and sick and hanging out on the corner, what started to happen in my life was that around 2.5, 3 years sober, I started to let myself be happy, you know. And it took about that long. For some reason, I thought that I had to be trudging and doom and just heavy. And somewhere along there I said, wait, you know, some of the light that you people have got in here. And I started to say, lighten up a little. You can laugh. Go to an AA dance, you know. I mean, that was a revelation. To be happy, sober, you know, was a revelation. To stop navel picking and to ask the guy next to me, do you want a cup of coffee? You know, are you going to the dance? To show up there and to dance, you know. To get active on the different committees, you know. I just started feeling good about things, you know. And what happened was, you know, what happens in AA is that the joy and the love and there's a power here that works. And what happened to my life was that I started going to school. And then I went to college. And I graduated from college and got a real good job. And in about 2 years after I got out of college, I was making 4 or 5 times what I was making when I got out. And I still loved to travel, and I got a job with a company that was flying me all over the U.S. and Canada to do my job, you know. And the greatest thing about having that job was that every place I set foot, I went to meetings, you know. And if there was a convention there that weekend, I stayed there and went to the convention and saved the company money and didn't fly home, you know. I just started having some fun, you know. And it's been really wonderful. And I think all I have to do when I want to prove to myself that the program works is just think about what's happened to me, you know. And through the process of working the 12 steps, I am now very close to the family that I alienated. I think the most powerful thing that has ever happened to me, other than looking at myself, shaking hands with myself and saying, it's okay, it's not the greatest, but it's okay, and it'll get better if you stay with the program, was when I worked the 8th and 9th step with my family and saw the healing that happened with that. I tell you, blew me out of the water. The only thing that ever happened to me was what happened the first time I tried to make amends to my sister alone, who was very sick as a result of my alcoholism. Just what's happened in her and my relationship, if that was all that had happened, I swear it would be enough. But of course more happened, you know. Not only did the relationships get better with my family, but I started making friends at work. And I started to feel like one among other human beings, you know, like I started living my life outside of these halls, you know, and school was exciting, and my job was exciting, and belonging to the athletic club was exciting, you know, and I found men were exciting, and I used to hate you bastards when I first came in. You know, life has gotten good, you know, and it all started with saying, okay, just for today, the same thing that I did this day, you know, I will not pick up a drink or a drug. But I am powerless over alcohol and drugs, and I have to ask for help. And I get on my knees and I just say, real simple, God, you know, thanks for the day. Please keep me away from the drink and the drug. Grant me the knowledge of your will for me and the power to carry whatever your will is for me. Grant me the grace and the power to carry it out. End of request, you know. I have come to believe in a higher power that I know, just like I know Alcoholics Anonymous works, I know that there is a higher power, a God, that wants the very best for me. You know, better than I want for me, better than any human being, but I know that there's a God that loves me and wants the very best for me. And I have very little trouble today, after practice and practice and practice, of turning that over. I mean, I trust implicitly my higher power. I trust implicitly the program, the principles of Alcoholics Anonymous. I do not think the program fails. I have failed. I have fallen short. I've watched some of you, you know, some of us fall short. But that's about being human, you know. The program has never let me down. When I've tried to hang on to these principles, I've always come out feeling better. I've always come out feeling glad that I didn't pick up the drink or the drug. I've always come out feeling like I was a little bit stronger in the program. And I tell you, how I feel today and how I live today is a long way from a drinking, bumming person, you know. I do not hate anyone, you know. I don't have the heart, I'm not afraid, you know. I have the normal fears, but I am not afraid. I'm comfortable in my own skin. I love being sober, you know, like the thing that I love most on the planet is Alcoholics Anonymous, because from that is where I've gotten everything else. And I do a lot of laughing, I do a lot of dancing, I do a lot of playing, I work hard, there's a lot of people in my life, and that's really different than the Gail I brought in here, who wouldn't let anybody close, who had chased everybody away, you know. I am self-supporting through my own contributions. I don't steal. I don't rob from people. You know, the material goods are their peace of mind. I don't know. I love people, and I feel very loved. Most of the time, I feel pretty good. And that is a long, long way from where I've come from. And it's been work, and it's been hard. Being sober is the most challenging, hardest thing I've ever done, but I don't love anything more. I mean, it demands everything full time. I can't even bother. I don't know how I ever took inventories before, because when you really start to live and let live in this program, there's so much that I have to do that there's just not enough time anymore. I really sometimes feel like there's not enough time for me to get done what I want to get done. And I wish the days were 48 hours at a stretch, But it's good, And I'll tell you, if I thought that there was something out there for me, some kind of relief in a drink or a drug, kind of person I am, I'd go for it, I'd go for it. But I just know from experience and from what I found here that this beats it all. I've never had so much joy and such a good sense of well-being ever in my life. I wasn't restored to sanity. I wasn't restored to a good way of life. It was created here in AA. I brought you guys nothing to work with, nothing to work with. So, it's all about what's happened here, and it's been good. And if you're sitting there wondering, if this thing will work for you, I'll just tell you, just give it your best shot. Give it your best shot, and I don't think you'll be disappointed, Thanks for being so patient and listening so long.